being here. So, how did I meet this guy?
I know.
You know, how did I meet this guy? It's funny because I know probably most of you think I'm pretty technical and probably nerdy because I have so much gear, but I really am not. And I don't understand probably 99.9% of what Igor does or talks about once it gets anything technical. But I do know that when he presents me with something, as anyone does, I just play music through it, and then I go, I like it, or I don't like it, and then I don't care about anything else. It's that simple. And on the other hand, what it takes for me to like it, I can't understand how he builds these kind of boxes and does all this stuff, and I really don't care because it just sounds good to me. But I do have to tell a story of how this all started, how our relationship started. Is I was walking down the aisles just like any of you were, and I'm looking at gear and going, ooh, cool or not cool. And then I walked past the Antelope booth, and they pull me aside and they go, hey, we've got something you should check out. It's a converter, or it's a clock. I'm like, a clock? What's a clock? They're looking at me like, ooh, okay. And I'm like, I don't know. Do I have a clock in my studio? And obviously at this point we were already doing, I was already in Pro Tools, but I didn't know really. I said, oh yeah, and they mentioned a couple of things. Oh yeah, I've got one of those. What's so important about it? Well, it kind of syncs everything together. Without it, you don't have much sound. I'm like, oh well, I guess it's pretty important. He goes, well, have you tried any other ones? I go, no. I mean, all it does is, it just makes it play, so you can mix. He goes, well, yeah, but you can also have a sound to it. And I was like, that's when I'm like, all right, I gotta go. I'll see you later. You try to push me a digital box that clocks, that has a sound, and they go, no, can we come by the studio and we'd like to just replace it with what you have, and you listen to it. And I go, all right, but I got to tell you, it's going to be a blind test. I don't want to know which one it is. I've already, and I had just done my Morning Jacket record, and it was really complex with all the reverbs and the depths and stuff. And I said, well, can we come by tomorrow? And I said, all right, I'll give you like 45 minutes or something in the middle of something, but I'm doing it. I'm like, for me in my mind, I'm like, I'll do it, but I don't believe it. But okay. So they came by the next day, and I said, all right. And I still had, the track up, and they said, all right. So I'm listening to what I had done with the clock that I had, and then they said, okay, we'd like to switch it out. And that was, what was that? That was the OX. What was that?
OCX.
The OCX, their first one. I said, okay. So then they switched it out, and then my assistant printed, the song again. And then I was like, all right. So I said, which are the two buttons that I'm going to go back and forth on? He goes, this one. And I said, okay, cool. So I'm going back and forth, and I have my eyes closed, and just the image that I was getting on one of them, it's hard to describe the visual. It almost felt like if I was listening to something on a stage. It felt like the curtain from like the lower mid-range on down was further ahead, and then everything else was just back a little bit. It just had this visual of something a bit uneven. And the only reason why I had that vision is because when I would switch to the other one, it felt like the curtains were right up to the edge of the stage. In other words, the bottom end, the mid range, the top, everything was just straight up. And I don't know, that was just the image I was getting, that I was feeling that sonically things were different. But even the mix just felt, one of them just felt open and big, which I assumed was what I had originally printed. So and I was going back and forth, and and the image became more and more obvious. And I was like, this, aside from the image, because it's not just about that, I was like, wow, this one feels great. This is how I'm sure this is what way I mixed it. I said, okay, well, this one is obvious, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, I hope I don't disappoint these guys, And it was like, that's the Antelope. And I was like, damn, clock really has something to do with the sound. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm like behind everybody else, right? But I just didn't know. I didn't know that there was a difference, and I didn't care until I did care, until I was like, wow, and then didn't you also have the 10M at that point?
A little bit later.
Just talk.
That was the next thing. The atomic clock came after that.
So that came.
That's the one where you said like, "Wow." Well, that was a different reaction to that.
Right.
You were saying you were nauseous. It had some like physical effect when you were switching it out. Or whatever.
Yeah, that was. Then there was a point where I guess the time has shrunken. It felt like it was the next hour, but then and I was like, I was sold, and I was like, okay, hey. I know something. Clock's really important to the sound. And I was like, I'm cool. And then sometime later I said, well, we also have, something that connects to this OCX. I go, what? He goes, well, it's a rubidium crystal from the planet,
from the mountains of Greece,
Venus, Jupiter or something. And I was like, okay, are we going to do the same thing again here? And he goes, no, and I go, well, is this separate? He goes, no, this, you kind of replace what there is already in there. And I go, well, why didn't you put it in there to begin with? Wow. Well, it's, very expensive, and it's made by, monks in the middle of, I was like, okay, all right. So we're going to do this taste test again? And he goes, yeah. And then I was like, all right. So again, it was just 2 buttons, and one was, I think at that point I was already obviously using your OCX, right? I had to be. Yeah. And then they added this 10M where the clock is even tighter. And my reaction was just, it was even more violent. I mean, one of them just had me dizzy, and the other one just felt so solid. I was like, man, this thing you just added is making me ill, And he goes, well, no, actually, that's with the clock, with the 10M. And I was like, oh, wow. Does that mean that without it, it really doesn't sound good at all? But then I remembered how much better it sounded. So I was like, wow, this is just progressively getting better. And again, I don't know what is in that box. All I know is like the mix that I had just kept sounding better. And the only way I can equate to where I felt with the 10M is that it reminded me of the days of multi-track, when everything just sounded so solid, so fat, and that was my first reaction. I go, this reminds me back of the days of 24-track, of the Studer. And I said, I don't understand. I go, don't all the tracks, aren't they always locked? And and we were just talking about earlier, and I said, I guess without a clock, they're not quite aligned. And he goes, well, that's not technically right, but they might be jitter. I'm like, jitter? What does that mean? Does it mean that the tracks are feeling a little bit loose? Because I'm feeling something, and now I'm not. Now it just locks everything up. And basically that's what the clock is doing. It's making, I guess it removes the jitter. I don't know. Well, so that's my introduction to Igor. It was just like, whatever you're doing, it sounds and feels great to me. And then of course I called, when you brought the 10M, I called my friend David Kahn and I said, David, man, you got to check this box out. But you know, he's just gonna come down, and then he called me a half hour later, you know, and he said, oh, it's great, I bought it. I go, you couldn't have bought it. There's only one in town. That was for me. I was like, I was so upset. He was like, no, give it back. I'm the one that turned you on to this.
It's amazing how he remembers these details, and because the David was interesting. Is for a very short amount of time, I actually lived in New York as a young man, and I remember the area where David lives in, and it was just like a meatpacking district, and it was just.
Well, that's where the studio was.
You know,
he doesn't live there.
Very interesting place to visit. All of a sudden, it was all like gentrified, beautiful homes and everything else. But I think that sort of brings in an interesting point of what's subjective and what's objective. And you know, like I'm a designer, I'm on the opposite end of the scale. Michael is the man that creates music that has a very much visceral and physical connection to all these things. I'm totally opposite, you know. I'm not sure that I can, you know, I don't proclaim to have golden ears. I don't play a musical instrument. You know, I have a double degree in electrical engineering and computer science. Just like, I used to think I'm tone deaf. Recently I discovered it's actually not the case, but, you know, I don't go about it the same way as he does, and which brings the interesting question Michael said when we were chatting before we began this thing. We were like trying to focus ourselves on the topics, and he said like, how do you do it? What do you do? What's in it? How is it done? The interesting thing is that from the engineering point of view, and I've always felt that for many years, is that we the way we go about measuring these things, and all of you have seen specs, you know, people love specs in certain cultures, like in Germany, for example, people really get into specs. If it's so many picoseconds, so many nanoseconds, or whatever, microvolts.
Which means nothing if it doesn't sound good.
Which, yes, and the Germans have a great saying in German, wer viel misst, 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 which means he who measures a lot measures bullshit, which is also interesting.
I gotta write that
which
down.
I learned a lot later about this aspect. But all these years in doing all these designs, I have always felt that what we are measuring as engineers is not really relevant. You know, the engineering science is based on sinusoids. It's like everything you do is you put in the sinusoid. Sinusoid is like sort of a magical, divine waveform. Well, I mean, the real audio is not just one sinusoid. So however many things you can measure with that sinusoid, like THDs, whatever, you know, at the end of the day, the real question is it really corresponding to what people are hearing? My answer after so many years is no. And so you have so much great equipment that just measures awful, gives awful. Like you take a great tube amp, has horrible THD, may even have horrible noise. I mean, technically, nominally speaking, it's a horrible piece of equipment. You should put it in your trash and have it taken out. You know, but the reality is not that. So when it comes to clocks, it's even worse. People don't even know what and how to specify them. Okay, for amplifiers, they kind of agreed. It's going to be THD, it's going to be like how many dB, you know, frequency response. And of course, nowadays, the ICs are so good that it's, you know, when you look at this amplifier 0.0001% or 0.0, it has become meaningless. I mean, it has gotten to the point where you don't even know what specs to look at, because all specs look good, all modern stuff looks good. You can buy it at Kmart and probably looks good on the specs. And when it comes to clocks, it's even worse. We never agreed what to measure. We never agreed what to measure. Okay, so how do you measure jitter? Okay, do you measure it over which band? Do you measure the absolute deviation? Do you measure the RMS value? Do you measure the weighted value? You know, so there's never really been a standard. So at the end of the day, I can't even say And so when I'm in Germany, they say, but yeah, you know, in Germany we have very good companies that make German clocks, and you know, and it's so many picoseconds, and how many picoseconds are you? And so that's one of those things that I never really. So at the end, I got tired of this thing. It's just that I can't answer in picoseconds. It's like take all the world, put it in picoseconds. Like I like Michael's description. He says he got sick. He was ready to throw up when he heard it. I mean, this is something that actually is great. You know, when you hear stuff like that, or when you hear it like when he describes it's a little bit further back, it's forward, it's back, you know, that's at least there's emotion in this thing. How much emotion is in 3 picoseconds? If I say it's 2 picoseconds versus 5 picoseconds, do you feel excited that I'm selling you 2 picoseconds? Oh, I guess, whatever. So at the end of the story,
pico?
Yeah,
Who
what's
cares?
a pico? What's a second, right? So at the end of the story, the moral of the story is and people ask me, you know, what makes your stuff sound good? Why does your stuff sound different? At the end of the day, I have to say in a very weird way, I don't know. There is really no rational way that I can explain it. Yes, I have studied a lot of engineering. Yes, I have worked on a lot of power supplies and linear circuits. Is it the experience? Is it all the years I put into this stuff? Is it all the stuff that didn't sound good? Is it the combination of all of these things? You know, I guess that's where at the end of the day you realize that designing audio equipment is just as much of an art and as much of a magic as it is to make a great record.
But I guess my question is, if you're not a musician, how did you get into this? Because you already admit you don't have a clue when you put all this stuff together. That someone like myself is going to come by and go, wow, this is good, or wow, that sucks pretty bad. I mean, how do you, because for you it's all numbers, and how do you correlate that? Well, this should actually sonically sound good because of what? I mean,
well, I guess sometimes it's not what makes it sound good, but what makes it sound bad. And it's like I think Dr. Seuss has a story about calculatus eliminatus. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's Dr. Seuss thing, where he says, you know, the only place to find the thing is where it's not. So you just you take out all the bad things. And if you take out enough bad things, then the diamond, you know, the beautiful, the true nature comes through. So one of the tricks of designing good equipment is not to design bad equipment. If that makes any sense.
And then
it's sort of a different point of view, I guess. But I mean, it's not that and it's not all numbers. I actually have an intuition for this thing. I mean, I do.
You have to.
I have the same thing as like you do, where it's up, it's down. Like for example, when you look at the analog circuit, I'm an analog engineer primarily, you know. But of course, you know, so many years have passed, and I've become digital engineer, and I've written a lot of VHDL, and I've written DSP plugins and blah, 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 but fundamentally I'm an analog engineer. And when I look at the schematic, I have a feeling, you know, like the positive power supply has to be always shown on top. Those of you guys who are electronic engineers know what I mean. The plus power supply has to be on top. The minus power supply has to be on the bottom. And if anybody turns it around, and I've seen like some bad copies of this stuff on the internet, and when I have it turned around, I can't understand the circuit. It's the same circuit, but all of a sudden it means nothing to me. So it's just as much, I have a relationship with these things, that they're spatial, and you know, so there is that subjectivity, that emotion. So for a certain circuit, I look at it, I say, okay, it's a good circuit, it's a bad circuit, whatever that means. You know, to me it means a lot.
But once you've done that, who in Antelope is in a non-technical, I mean, you know, you say, okay, here's an idea, and then who do you give it to? You give it to Lubo? Who do you give it to? I mean, who do you have there that goes, well, I don't know what you did, but this ain't happening for me, you know? And then, I mean, you have 5 people that listen to that?
Well, no, I mean, it takes,
it's great.
Unfortunately, we've gotten into such complicated things that it's now a production and a half. It's not like, you know, there's so many people involved, our engineering team, you know, like just to get that thing to the point where you can listen to it, you know, it's already gone for 10 engineers, you know, and it's just a whole thing.
But they sound like they're engineers.
Yeah, they're engineers.
Right,
yeah,
but You mean
And
like
some of them have
they're like
yeah.
technical engineers? Are they musical engineers?
The boring technical engineers, the guys with master's degrees in like computer science.
Then how is it possible
that
that it gets to me and it sounds good if you don't have musical people checking it out?
That's the magic. That's the magic. That's the magic, and then that's the thing that's our lifetime of experience. I don't know. It's the thing of some people. Maybe it's a gift from God. I mean, sometimes I think it's also has sort of a inspiration that comes from other places.
Yeah, well, you need a guy like me over there to be you're checking out your gear, and then.
When you have God, we don't need a guy like that.
Oh, you're going to bring him into the story?
But no, seriously, yes, of course, the stuff does get into real studios because, and it gets into real studios much before it becomes a commercial product. And it's not like we build it, we make it, we're marketing it. Well, let's see what now. No, but we do beta studies and we do beta tests and we take the feedback, all the usual corporate stuff and more. And we have our friends and guys we work close with and who are the first ones to check it out. And usually those guys have a lot of interesting things to say, not always positive. And it's very useful.
That's cool.
I mean,
and then eventually you call me.
Yeah, I mean,
it was interesting.
It's scary. I mean, you got to realize from our perspective, we were very scared when we came to you because, well, you were a huge name. We were nothing. We just had that one box. And what if you didn't like the box? What would have happened? You could have hated the box. You could have had like a bed pastrami for your lunch. Where you say, okay, get it out. This is horrible. And we would be finished. So we were very nervous.
Whoa. Putting a lot of pressure on me. Well,
so you know,
it's good to be honest, about stuff. I mean, that's how I choose pretty much all my gear. It was interesting when I moved out of electric. I'd already heard it. I was learning how to do hybrid. So in order how to do hybrid, I wasn't just going to jump into it. I was still on the analog. I was an electric lady, and I turned my live room into a hybrid room. And in my main room, I had HDX, but in the live room, I wanted to be able to, bring all this gear down to something a lot smaller. And the Orion 32 totally addressed my situation. And it sounded good. And so I started mixing on, with the Orion. And then when I moved to my own studio, I said, wow, I think I'm going to continue with this. I'm not going to go with HDX. I like the sound, but I also wanted to make sure that you could address my ability to put hardware plugins in and not have any, delay issue, which your first generation hadn't addressed yet. And he said, yeah, no, we got that done. And then, that was the Gen 2s. And I was like, that's great. Now I can take all my hardware and just assign it to, 64 of these. And now I never have to patch anything in again. It's like another software, except it's hardware. It's a hardware plugin, which I didn't even know you could do. But when they said you don't have to plug in stuff anymore, I was like, okay, we're good. I'll do that. Is there a problem with that? Was it latency? But they've addressed that. Okay, great. So that's what I did I moved into my new studio last July. So it's been a year plus a few months. And then, so I had the Gen 2s and I had the Pure 2 as a converter. And then recently they said, well, we've got the Gen 3s. And I was like, are they better? Just because they say 3. And they go, yeah. And I said, why? What's the sound? And it's a little bit wider. It's just a little deeper. We have some new chips or something you've thrown in there. Maybe
a few things here.
A few things. I don't care. what they are. But, you know, I said, all right, well, I'm happy with the 2s, but, you know, let me try out the 3s. So we worked out a deal, and I replaced all the 2s with the 3s. And then I said to Fernando, my assistant, I go, okay, let's just make sure, as I've always done, because, you know, it's nice to think that you go to another generation that you're supposed to go good, but what if you don't, right? I mean, you should never believe what anybody says, as much as I like them, and, you know. So I said, look, open up a track that we already mixed on the 2s, and let's put in the 3s. You know, let's do it again. Let's just play the same, because, you know, it's going to be really easy. Just, you know, recall my gear, get it going. It'll take 20 minutes. And then print it, and then we'll listen. And, you know, then we A-B'd, and it was the same as always. You don't know which one you're listening to, because if you do, then you're obviously going to go with one of them. It's so easy to be influenced. And it was a difference. It was a good difference. I liked it. And I was like, okay, wow, that's good. That's good, because I already installed them all. What would I do? Take them all out? But so that was good news. And then they said, well, we also have, you know, a new converter. I was like, oh, man. You're killing me here. You know, I was so used to the Pure 2s. And it was the Amari. And when I got it, I was like, oh, come on, guys. What is this? This is a tabletop, you know. I don't have space for this. It was, you know, it looked beautiful, but, you know, it's a 2-space, and it doesn't have ears on it. It's not 19. You know, and I was just like, I can't fit that in there. I've got a real estate issue here. You know, I've got one space. So I sent it back. They were not happy. And then I met Igor's new man, who's sitting right over here. Throw your hand up. And he says, I'm in town, you know, and, you know, I'm sorry you didn't like. I go, well, I don't know if I liked it or not like. I can't stick it in my rack. There's no room. And you know, and it's really like a sardine can in this rack. It's not like you can just open stuff up, and, you know, the cables are only long enough. Long story short, I said, I can't do this. I sent it back. And so we're having dinner. And because he's a good salesman, you know, he goes,
me.
Yeah, he goes during the dinner, he goes, we've got this technology, it's unbelievable, it's not out on anybody else, and it's just, I love the sound. And then there's a great headphone in there where, you know how you have different headphones, and then the impedance, you know, always messes up, because now we have this, and you can just choose it to what's right for your headphones. I was like, oh yeah, well, what do I care, you know, if I don't like the converter. And so I go, yeah. I said, all right, I'll see if I can get. I mean, he was such a good talker. I was like, all right, send it back. You know, I mean, I sent it back to Bulgaria, right? Where was it?
I'm not sure where you sent it back, but you sent it back.
I sent it back somewhere. And I go, all right, send it back to me. and then I was like, I'll find some longer cables to do this. And, you know, short story longer.
Yeah, longer.
I was like, wow, this sounds pretty good. We had some technical issues because it was more level, and I was trying to A-B it to something that had less level, and then it was, you know. But we got through that. And then we listened, right, Fernando? We listened. I was like, damn, this sounds good. Damn, I have no room. Where am I going to stick this thing? You know? And of course, I go, listen, you think maybe you could build me one that's just one rack?
And we said no.
And we said no. And I was like, okay. So then, well, I guess it'll sit on top. It looks nice. You know, I guess it'll sit on top. So then I had my tech come in, and that's what we have now, and it feels good, and again, it's just always sonically upping the game just a little bit. You know, I mean, that's what it's about. And then when I go back and I listen to a previous one or a competitor, I go, wow, that's, you know, it just musically feels better. And that's all I'm trying to do. I mean, I am a mixer. I'm not into the technical part of it. I just wanted to, if I've got an advantage, if I put this piece of this gear in, and I go, wow, this feels even closer to what I want with less work, I'm game. And the more it sounds analogish, the more it sounds like what I grew up feeling, the better I feel and happier I am, because there's certain things that you just can't do as a mixer, that you can't raise that ceiling and that bottom and that width. That's, you know, like the way you used to, that just naturally existed in the days of analog. That these are things that where technology that, you know, that Igor is building, I like, because it keeps making the image a little wider, a little bit deeper, and if it's just a little, that's good enough for me. You know, it's as long as an improvement, that it feels like my picture is getting, you know, is more real.
Oh, it's interesting,
So
right? I mean, that's the thing about us is we are always also interested to see what's going on. You know, that the world. I have gone through so many cycles. This is not the first time I have done interfaces. It's not the first time I've done mic pre's. I was the first person who's built an 8-channel interface ever. I was the first person who put on the mic pre's on the interfaces, and I've done this 20 years ago when people didn't even know why a mic pre wasn't an interface, because back then it was not something that belonged to an interface. An interface was supposed to be a line in and a line out. And so to me, I feel like I've done so many things and I'm doing it over and over again, but every time, you know, the history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so when you go back over this stuff, you can always do it a little bit better. That's why I still have that urge to improve, because there's so many companies, they do some stuff, you know, they design something, they figure it's gonna last 5, 6, 7, 8 years on the market, maybe then they'll do something else. But I'm actually excited when I see a new chip coming out, or a new, you know, like in the converter you got, it actually uses the latest generation of the chips that just came out last year, which is cool, you know, and it's cool to see that people are always doing something new. Instead of just, you know, some people like that idea, some people don't. There's those who accuse Antelope for just changing products too often, for having too many products, for obsoleting the products. You know, I guess it depends on your perspective. But I think it's kind of cool because, like, I think, you know, I don't think everything has been done, because otherwise, you know, why do it again? Because I've certainly done a lot of stuff. I've done the mic pre's, I've done the tube stuff, I've done the transistor stuff, so why do it again? But yes, every generation, everything brings some new perspective. And I think it's very, very important to realize that there is a new perspective. It changes the way people master the music, the way people produce the music, and we can learn from people that are working today in the way that they're working today. And it's important to maintain that curiosity on a technical level. And that's why I think we're still able to surprise Michael. And so that when we bring the new thing, he listens to it and says, okay, like, he got the Amari, even though it doesn't, you know, fit. It really wouldn't fit in his rack, and I refused to redo it. Sorry, it was too hard to do it in the first place. But, you know, there is that thing. I think that the innovation and the ability to integrate and the ability to look at things, look at the old things through the new eyes, with the new eyes, is very important in engineering and in audio. And as long as people can do that, there will be interesting things happening. And that's what, you know, my brand or things that I'm doing. You know, I just want to integrate all this life's worth of experience, all the analog, all the digital, all the tubes, all the transistors, all the tape machines. As a kid, I was building tape machines by hand filing down the metal, and, you know, this was exciting to me. I just want to bring this back. I want to bring the essence of it back, which we're doing now with the plugins, because we're going back to the plugins, but I'm very excited about the old German stuff. I'm like on the Neumann, and I'm very, you know, going through the schematics that are now much older than me, you know, and it's interesting to me. This is fascinating because there were a lot of good ideas that went on and people forgot about them. They moved on, they changed the technology, but it's important to go back and preserve this stuff. So to me, this is one way that I can bring the old into the new. So get a modern DSP processor, put in the old technology that was created, when I wasn't even a project in my parents' mind. But that excites me. That kind of stuff excites me. And I think that if those of you guys that want to go into design, that want to think about design, I think it's worthwhile to look at the history of all the people, even though it seems irrelevant, it seems trivial. Somebody did some like two-tube amplifier in 1928. Some of these papers, they go back so far back. When you do the research, it's amazing how many things and what kind of things people have done 100 years ago. They actually had something working 100 years ago. It's amazing. So to me, this is cool. And this is, I think, even though I cannot rationally explain why our stuff sounds good, what the secret formulas are, maybe there are no secret formulas, but I think keeping that curiosity and looking at things from that perspective and keeping things relevant, I think is going to keep surprising him, because he's the kind of guy that he's also very much the man that, in spite of the huge history, sees something today to him as just as irrelevant as it was 40 years ago or 30 years ago. He's just as much today as he was back then.
And it still comes down to how musical what you're designing is, how musical it feels, and that the ability to do something that is just so technical, all this digital stuff, and then I come along and I go, wow, this just helps what I'm doing feel better. But really, at the end of the day, that's all I'm looking for. That's quite an accomplishment. I think we just have a few minutes left. Can we do a Q&A? Or are we supposed to be just talking? Can we do a Q&A? Is there a microphone somewhere here? Can we get a microphone so that, yeah, great. Do you have a question? Excellent. We have one question right down here.
Question. Here we go.
Hello.
Hello.
I guess since you're talking about history, us old folks, I'm counting myself very old, have a history of remembering in our minds what analog felt like. Is that what you're trying to accomplish?
Always trying to get back
to that?
But that's a tricky question. I'm not looking for what analog, like I loved Neve, right? I love the analog desk. But then, when the SSL came around after like maybe the second generation or third generation, to me, when they got to the 9000, it had all what I loved about the Neve and the modern sound that the Neve didn't have. So it's always adapting to what is today's sound, and I don't mean in a negative way, because I'm in a hybrid situation now. I don't need an analog desk. I still have SSL across every channel, but I still have a rack of gear behind me. So I'm very much hybrid. Anybody says I'm in the box, I just laugh. I go, no. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be able to get a really good mix in the box either. But if you're asking me, what am I trying to do? I grew up in that world. I know what that feels like, right? And so all it is a feel. But that feel is changing. And I don't, if I went back to Luther Vandross days and listened to what is analog then and what is analog now, it's a much bigger picture. That things change, and evolving through just where the music is going. But I still want to feel a certain warmth. I want the top end not to have a ceiling. I want the bottom end to go down really, really far, further than what the analogs used to do. So I love the modern technology, as long as it doesn't sound bad to me. And I don't know what bad is, except to say that it doesn't sound good. That's their job. And I don't. There's 100 pieces of gear. You've got all endless amounts of converters, endless amounts of clocks, and I'm not going to try them all out. But all I know is that, well, this one feels really good to me, so I'm good. That's it. That's me. And then if you like another piece of gear better, good for you, as long as you're ending up with a record that sounds really good and is well liked. That's really the bottom line. There's nothing more that counts. Because I don't, all this gear behind me, if my mixes sound like crap, how does it matter what if I have Antelope or an original Pultec or a Motown? It's you don't like it.
Of course, an interesting thing is when nowadays I'm in modeling, which is the only way to preserve the history, because many of the stuff will never be built again. And when you try to model it, the interesting question you should ask yourself is, how much do you preserve certain maybe what was regarded as weaknesses of the designs? For example, do you want it to be as noisy as the original was? If you're making a tape machine, do you want the hiss or do you want it without the hiss? How much of the tape speed modulation would you actually like to have, right? If you have older units that were cutting the frequencies, do you want it like extended out, refreshed? So, and if you want the warmth, how much of the warmth should you keep or should you not keep? Because there's people who model vintage EQs that have tubes in them, and sometimes they don't model the tubes part, they just model the frequency response of the EQs. So those are very, very interesting questions, because you cannot, modeling things is to model everything. There's no such thing as 100% accurate model, because you can it would take so much computer power you wouldn't be able to run even a single instance. So the only real model of the thing is the thing itself. Everything else is a compromise of some kind or some kind of limitations. So the interesting thing is to figure out what's relevant and what's not relevant, and that's sort of an amazing philosophical question, and something that you were asking.